What would it feel like to stand on the shores of West Africa in the 1500s, only to be torn from everything you've ever known? From the 1525 to 1866, this was the harsh reality for nearly the 12.5 million Africans, mothers, fathers, and children, who were forced into a nightmare journey across the Atlantic. Life as they knew it ended abruptly. After reaching the coastal ports, captives faced the first layer of their grim reality. They were stripped of their clothing, belongings, and even their hair, leaving them utterly bare and defenseless. For weeks, they waited in makeshift shelters, surrounded by netting like mere cargo, trapped under watchful eyes. And this was just the beginning. The journey that followed would push human endurance to its limits. Join us as we explore the haunting, heart-wrenching reality of life aboard a slave ship. Below decks, the crushing conditions. Once forced below deck, their new home became even more claustrophobic and hellish. The compartments were barely tall enough for an adult to stand, just 4.5 feet high, and overcrowded with hundreds of bodies packed together. Just think about having no personal space, surrounded by others in this cramped space, day and night. Men, women, and children were split up. The men shackled in pairs, women generally left unshackled, and children left to roam what little space there was. There were no bathrooms and no privacy. People relieved themselves where they sat or lay, and the smell alone was unbearable. Without proper ventilation, the heat turned the cramped quarters into an oven. Disease spread quickly. Dysentery, malaria, yellow fever, smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through, taking lives indiscriminately. The crew wasn't spared either. Anyone could fall victim to the filthy conditions. Life below deck was simply survival, minute by minute, hour by hour, in a setting no human should ever have to endure. A day in darkness and brief, moments in light. To the enslaved, days blurred together in a painful monotony. They spent around 8 hours each day above deck, but even this small reprieve was under tight supervision. They weren't allowed to relax or connect with each other freely. Instead, they were divided by gender, with a wall called a barricade, keeping the crew and captives apart in case someone tried to resist or rebel. The crew had a twisted idea of exercise. Forced to move, often under the watchful eyes of the crew, captives were sometimes made to dance and sing, as if this cruel mockery of joy would entertain their captors. Imagine the hollowness of a forced dance, every step weighed down by shackles and heartbreak. It's almost unimaginable, yet this was the reality for so many: punishment and control. The crew maintained control through violence and brutality. Disobedience, or even a sign of it, was met with terrifying punishments. Those who resisted orders or tried to refuse their meager rations of rice and beans were not simply ignored. They could be whipped with a tool known as the cat o' nine tails, designed to inflict unbearable pain with each strike. Some who tried to refuse food had it forced down their throats with a device called a speculum orisdi, which pried open their mouths so they couldn't resist. Women, though unshackled, faced another horror: frequent abuse by the crew. In the close quarters and total darkness, many women suffered at the hands of their captors, with some arriving in the New World pregnant by their attackers. Even in these conditions, resistance emerged, often led by the women. They found ways to support each other, even as they faced nearly impossible odds. The horror of the Zong Massacre. Among all the tragedies of the Middle Passage, the story of the slave ship Zong stands out as a shocking example of greed for human life. The Zong left what is now Ghana in 1781, packed with 442 enslaved people. At this voyage faced trouble. Navigational errors left the crew lost, and as disease spread on board, around 62 captives and 7 crew members died. With fresh water supplies running low, Captain Luke Collingwood made a horrific choice. Instead of letting the remaining captives suffer or die slowly from disease, he ordered that about T-130 of them be thrown overboard. It wasn't just a cold decision for survival, there was money involved. Death by disease wasn't covered by the ship's insurance, but drowning was. Collingwood was thinking about profit, putting a price on each life and throwing it into the sea if it meant recovering his losses. This act of brutality, known as the Zong Massacre, showed just how little value captives held in the eyes of their captors. A court case that changed hearts. When the Zong returned to port and its owners tried to collect insurance for the captives they had murdered, it sparked outrage. The owners argued that, just as a sick animal could be put down to save the rest, the same could be done to enslaved people. The court actually sided with the owners, but the details of the trial didn't go unnoticed. Word spread, and the story of the Zong Massacre became a powerful tool in the fight against the slave trade. British abolitionists took up the cause, using the horrifying facts of the case to open people's eyes to the barbaric nature of the Middle Passage. The story of the Zong wasn't just one terrible incident, it represented the cruelty of the entire slave trade system. It took years, but in 1807, Britain and the United States finally outlawed the international slave trade. Slavery itself, however, remained for decades. 26 more years in Britain, and painfully, 58 more in the United States, until the end of the Civil War. A legacy of pain and resilience. The Middle Passage represents one of humanity's darkest chapters, a forced migration of staggering brutality, stripping away freedoms, and treating lives as cargo. For the millions who endured this journey, survival was an act of resilience. The echoes of that resilience shaped the histories of entire nations. The scars of the Middle Passage still linger in the stories of those who descended from these survivors. Reflecting on this history isn't easy, but it's necessary. The story of the Middle Passage, with its relentless cruelty and unbroken spirit, reminds us of both the depths of human cruelty and the strength of the human will to survive. When we talk about it now, it's not just recounting the past, it's honoring those who lived through it, even if they never got to see freedom. In remembering these stories, we're not just looking at the suffering, we're also acknowledging the strength and humanity of those who survived and those who resisted. So that's the wrap-up. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. There's so much more history to uncover together.